It's a great educational opportunity for us, and I'm very happy that Craig could fit us into his very busy schedule. I'd also like to welcome all of those from SF MoMA who are here this evening with us. Craig Dykers is the founder of Snøhetta, a transdisciplinary, maybe you could turn that down just a touch, thank you. A highly collaborative and transnational firm that he began in Oslo with his colleagues after winning the international design competition for the Alexandria Library in Egypt in 1989. Since that time, the immense success of the office has led to the creation of a number of regional offices for the firm, as well as their main office outside of Oslo, which is in Lower Manhattan in New York City. The firm was named after a mountain, and I'm sure Craig will tell you about it, and not a person, a landscape. And this tells us about let's say, the attitude of the firm, but also perhaps what is most successful in the work of the firm, that its architecture often operates like an occupiable landscape for the public, that it is powerfully monolithic, sculptural, and highly articulate, yet at the same time has a kind of embedded materiality, and also the fact that it's always embedded in its site, that site is somehow intrinsic, and that it has a kind of earthbound syntax. It is for people, and yet at the same time, it is something that always seems to have been there. Craig has been deeply involved with the design of over 200 projects in Asia, Africa, America, and Europe. Most notable among these are the Library of Alexandria in Egypt, the new National Opera and Ballet in Oslo, Norway, and the 9/11 Memorial Museum Pavilion at the World Trade Center in New York City. Other architecturally significant built works include the Norwegian Embassy in Berlin, Germany, certainly one of the best of the international embassies located there, the Winter Olympics Art Museum in Lillehammer, Norway, and since establishing an office in New York City, Craig and his company have been awarded a number of important commissions that include, of course, the new expansion of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, which all of us in San Francisco are looking forward to, the reconstruction of Times Square in New York City, new central libraries for Ryerson University in Toronto, my hometown, I'm happy to say, and North Carolina State University in Raleigh, several concert halls in also the US and Canada, and the Guadalajara Museum of Environmental Sciences in Mexico. Craig and Snøhetta have received numerous international, national, and local awards, including being the only firm to have twice received the prize for the best cultural building at the World Architecture Awards in Barcelona for the Alexandria Library and the Norwegian National Opera. Other important awards include the Mies van der Rohe Prize in 2009, the Aga Khan Prize for Architecture in 2004, and most recently the Global Award for Sustainable Architecture. He was also just recently awarded an honorary fellowship in the Royal Institute of British Architects. Craig received his professional architectural degree from the University of Texas in 1985, and in 2002 received the Outstanding Alumnus Award from his alma mater. He has held a number of academic appointments, including being a visiting or distinguished professor at the Architectural Academy in Oslo, Syracuse University, City College in New York City, and Cornell University at their Manhattan campus. He's also been a visiting critic at many American and European institutions. He's lectured internationally as a keynote speaker for the International Union of Architects for their 50th anniversary in Lausanne, Switzerland, for the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C., the Royal Academy in London, and the Guggenheim Museum in New York. We're, of course, very privileged to have Craig with us this evening. Please join me in welcoming Craig Dykers.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here. I came here for the first time a little over 10 years ago when there was an extra C after the CCA. I think it was the CCAC. But I fell in love with the school the first time I walked through the door, and it's easy to do. It's an amazing environment here, and all of you that are students, I think, are quite lucky to be here. So it's nice to be able to talk to you about our work, and as was mentioned, we are, in fact, not named after a person. We're named after a place. There are several reasons for that. This mountain is who we're named after. It's a beautiful place, certainly, But more importantly, the notion of stripping authorship from the various constituents within the company is a key aspect of how we operate. So rather than identifying the projects with a few select people, they're identified across the office through the understanding of this mountain as a sort of icon. We often take trips there, so there nobody takes you seriously if you don't climb the mountain of Snøhetta. It's really an amazing climb, and some of our staff, even from New York, have traveled over to Norway to go there. Very interesting experience, and actually quite challenging, even though it's a fairly simple climb, but can be very difficult, as you can see here. As was mentioned, we do have two offices in Oslo and New York. I enjoy these two images together because they show somehow that we've ended up somehow on the edge of something, on the fringe. And in both locations, actually, that part of the city in Lower Manhattan and in Oslo were somewhat ravaged by either economy or, as in case of New York, by the World Trade Center tragedies in 2001. And so we see ourselves as part of the revival of these portions of the communities where we've situated ourselves, and that's an important aspect also of how we identify ourselves with the cities where we are. We are fairly large, about 100 people. We do get to come together every now and then. So we came together in Scotland once. This is, of course, you can tell, I guess, by the kilts. But it was a great experience for all of us to meet up sort of halfway across the Atlantic. We're about 75% architects working in the office, and then about 15% landscape architects and interior architects as well. We call ourselves transdisciplinary because, in a sense, the actual disciplines that people manage are not categorized within the office. So we blend disciplines across projects. So a landscape architect can actually be drawing an interiors project, or an interior architect can be working in architecture. There's no real rules. I guess transdisciplinary is better than, we feel, multidisciplinary. Multidisciplinary just somehow implies you have a lot of things, but they're all categorized. I guess transdisciplinary is a bit like transgender. You don't really know what you are, but you're having a lot of fun doing it. And with that respect, we have a very wide and diverse group of people. I think we're from about 15 different nationalities. We're, I think, 6 different sexual preferences last time we counted. I've lost track of that. And we're roughly about 50% male, 50% female, and we try to keep a healthy balance, and we're working on sort of the ethnic breakdown of our office too, but we try to hold forth a fairly social and an environment and something that's applicable to our political beliefs in terms of how we see society as a rich and diverse place. Our office in Oslo is rather beautifully located, although when we moved there it was just a dilapidated warehouse. But it's quite beautiful to sit in the office and look out and watch 60,000 tons of steel float by in the neighboring Oslo fjord as the ferries move back and forth. In New York office, we're near a piece of steel too, and that's at the bottom of Broadway in Bowling Green, where there's this sort of famous bull that many of you have seen. So our office is back behind that, roughly where you see the yellow windows. And I look out at this bull quite often, and I like to see how people react to this rather small but somehow influential monument. So about 50% of the tourists take this picture, and the other 50% of the tourists take that picture. And actually, it does depend on how the economy is as to how that percentage is shifting. Right now, there's more people on the back side. But it's interesting to me in a sense that, there is this fascination with the testicles especially, and everybody likes to hold them. And it's somehow, you can see they're very highly polished. And there's, I think, something about our intrinsic fascination with all things that I think is kind of interesting. And most of us in the academic world or in professional world would overlook that because it's sort of embarrassing. but I don't think we should be embarrassed about our sort of natural dimension. In the office, we tend to have larger groups working on projects, but still we try to respect the identity of the individual. We often call this singular in the plural, which allows you to have your voice, but also you're sort of given the responsibility to interact with the group around you. So this is a view out the office in a window in Oslo. And this is the view out the office in New York, which is a slightly different kind of view during one of the ticker tape parades in Broadway. But still, there's a sense of community, or let's say, I'd rather use the word just kind of density of experience that both offices relate to. Our office interior is also very important to us. In both New York and in Oslo, we have this similar setup. We have divided the office more or less in half, and on one side is what we call food, and the other side is what you might call work. And the food area has this very large tables, which you can see here, that people can use for meetings. And then there's a drawing studio off to the side. So I've brought a little film, a kind of time-lapse film. This is taken in our Oslo office of the central space. So that's the sort of amphitheater that we use for every 2 weeks we have an office meeting. So it's a kind of a social space. Those are the only two enclosed rooms in the office. There's the office meeting, you can see there. And those rooms are enclosed primarily because they have video conference facilities, so it's an acoustic issue. But otherwise, everyone sits in this open space, bound together, the food and work areas bound together by this social mixing zone that people use in different ways. Those little plastic bags that you see at the top, those are leftover party decorations. And after they were put up, everyone liked them so much, they never came down. But interestingly, they don't really move. And obviously, this is time-lapse photography, so they appear to move. But in the space, you don't notice them moving. This is looking straight down onto the worktops in the large food area. So we have a kitchen there. And in the morning, of course, this is about 9 o'clock in the morning, people come in and start to do their work. And here's a bunch of architects pushing paper. This is what architects do now. We don't actually do anything else but push paper. And there are different meetings with different groups and different projects going on simultaneously at the same space. And what will happen is that you'll see getting closer to 12 o'clock, they'll start to put out napkins, and it'll become lunchtime. And the meeting will then shift into a sort of eating period. So we all eat together in a big kind of communal atmosphere. There's the eating. And then it goes back to a meeting. So there's this very interesting idea, I think, that brings food into the office environment very directly. In fact, in our office in New York, you more or less enter directly into the kitchen, and you have to sort of pass, not through the kitchen, but immediately past it to get into the office space. There's no receptionist, so the kitchen is basically the space that you enter into. So it creates a kind of dynamic social environment. In terms of process, we like to say that we're scavengers. We'll take any kind of process that seems appropriate for the task at hand. We do obviously work with digital technology, but we also place a great deal of emphasis on analog or physical model building, things that don't use computers but actually use your hands, and you have to use your body to make. One of the things we like to say is that if you're only thinking with your brain, you're not really thinking. You have to think with your whole body in order to make the process complete. And oftentimes, the interaction of our body with something directly allows for our minds to reach a different sort of level. So in this sense, we're often moving back and forth between the wood shop, which in both offices has a sort of glass window into the drawing studio, and we're managing the process depending on the project in different ways. So sometimes things will start from a hand model and move into a digital model. Sometimes they'll start with a digital model and move into a hand model, or be digital for the entire process. There's no rule that says you have to build with your hands, but it's an important idea that we're always moving freely between technologies and testing things as adequately as we can. Since we've come to the United States, it's been an interesting process. It's very different than working in Europe. In the US and in North America, clients are often very closely involved with the design process. So we've had to create new ways of working. One of the things that we do is create series of workshops, sort of games that we can work together with large and complex groups of people to manage a process together so that we design the project organically from the beginning. And in fact, that's what we've been doing here in San Francisco since we've begun this process, developing workshops together with the Museum of Modern Art. This is a picture of one of our workshops in Ohio. I like this picture. It's a very classic picture. That's my wife. And this is some of our architects here. This is the client. This is our local architect working on these things. And that guy in the back is the financial guy. There's always a financial guy in the back like this. And the amazing thing is that this project was under budget, and it didn't matter. He still looks like that. So it has nothing to do with overspending. It's just money makes that sort of occur. One of the things we like to say is that our projects are deeply indebted to the human condition. So perhaps we're amateur anthropologists. We like to talk about why people do things, why we do things, what is it that's motivating us. That often our motivations are more powerful than the process that we anticipate or the process that we exhibit as our methodology. So human behavior is a big part of discussions in the office. We like to say that most of the framework of the human mind in contemporary human mind is framed by our ancestry and our past as gatherers and hunters and our current state of mind, which is almost purely domesticated. We live within this world of predictability and intuition and the spectrum of all the things that connect those two ideas within us. We have become today very domesticated creatures. Sometimes I say that I feel humans are the most domestic creature on earth, more domestic even than livestock or cattle, because we actually domesticate ourselves. We don't have anyone else do it for us. So at a certain degree, we're self-domesticating. Yet within us is a challenge to break the predictability of domestication. If our lives are too pure and predictable, we go out and have a party or do something crazy to balance the world that is so predictable around us. If things get too out of hand and too crazy, we look for something we can grab onto to say that we understand this, and there's a degree of predictability within the chaos. So I would say that our architecture is attempting to address these issues within the human mind and present them in a physical way. And that's because we always believe that people are not abstractions within the work. In many ways, although of course you can argue this, buildings are also not abstractions, but in the context of this discussion, what we're trying to say is that people are physical, fleshy things with fleshy desires and fleshy needs. We're not sort of mathematical units that can be sort of equated as fuel. So often we're thought that we think as designers that we make an object and later we kind of just let the people get stuffed in and somehow they'll make it work. But we're trying to think of it in the opposite direction. We take the people, we try to understand what they do, we manage our understanding about how people function in society and allow that to create a physical form. And there's, of course, a huge range of sort of infinite range of ways of understanding that because people are infinitely complex. The first project that we won and began our office with was mentioned earlier, the Library of Alexandria in Egypt. We won this project in 1989. We were all very young, so it was a group of us who got together to make the design for this competition. None of us were over the age of 30, so we were all really just kids, almost fresh out of school, and we had this sort of idealistic dream that maybe we could do something important, and we entered this competition. In the end, I think 530 were judged from 70-some-odd countries around the world, and we somehow managed to get first prize. And I remember it was a rather fascinating experience for me. I was at home and in the shower and got the call that we won, and I went outside and sort of screamed really loud, "Yeah, we won!" And then I looked down and realized I was still naked and dripping wet, and sort of, oops. But it was a very exciting time for us, and we all arrived in Alexandria to accept the prize. And I remember I had to use, basically all of us, we used our prize money just to buy the tickets to receive the prize. So it was a sort of circular route. But we arrived, and at that time I had a great deal more hair. Actually, I think Alexander the Great's 33 in this picture here. He had a lot of hair too. But he didn't lose it. I had lost mine. But there was a funny sort of experience where we all showed up with sort of long hair and holey jeans and whatever we could afford to wear. And they looked at us and they said, "Well, who are you?" And we said, "Well, we're Snøhetta." And their sort of faces went white because it was an anonymous competition. They didn't know who the architects were that had won. And they said, "Well, that's nice, but when do we get to meet the Mr. Snøhetta?" So we said, "Well, we were it." And they said, "But you're too young to be the architects." And I remember we laughed. We said if anyone older would have won this competition, they'd be dead by the time it was finished. And sure enough, it took 13 years to complete this project. It was an enormously overwhelming undertaking. And I often say that it was really our naivete that allowed this to happen. There's a great deal of power in being naive. You're sort of willing to take on anything and get it done. Anyone smarter would have walked away from this project on the first day. So in a sense, we were happy that we were blinded by our ideals, and we moved forward. The project itself is situated on the ancient harbor of Alexandria, which has been written about by Homer in the Iliad, and in fact had a history long before Alexander the Great founded the city of Alexandria. This harbor has been in continuous use in much the same way that it is today for over 17,000 years. And it's this beautiful form, this kind of wonderful circular form within the city as a sort of negative shape that the city must accommodate. So it's a great example of urban, sort of merging urban identity with an uncontrollable feature such as the sea, the Mediterranean Sea. That shape developed over a long period of time, over 1,000 years. It was originally a half crescent, and there was a small island where the lighthouse of Alexandria once stood, and that island was disassembled, and they created a kind of causeway that helped protect the harbor in a better manner than it had been in the past. And the red circle that you see here is the location of the new library, which was also the place where Cleopatra had her palace and her museum, and where eventually she committed suicide. It's, of course, many wonderful stories from Alexandria. Many of you may be familiar with the love triangle of Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, and Cleopatra, as well as wonderful poems by Cavafy, and Forster was a great writer there. It's a kind of a rough city, but when you enter it with the eyes of history, it's a wonderful place. And one of the things we noticed was that very quickly there was a need to ensure that this coastline was protected. It's this very, very long city. So as you see the site alongside the rest of the city, which is I think about 70 kilometers long and only about 7 kilometers wide in some places. Very narrow, long city along the harbor front. And that connection of this part of the city to the original city was very important to us. This is the site, and this is where the ancient lighthouse of Alexandria once stood. When they first pulled off the topsoil at the site, I remember taking this picture. It was kind of astonishing. They lifted up about a meter of soil, and underneath that, almost immediately, were human remains, hundreds and hundreds of years old, and in some cases thousands of years old, pottery shards that dated back deep into early Hellenistic history in Egypt. So in a sense, everywhere you walked and everywhere you looked, 160 meters in any direction, were human bone fragments. Almost everywhere you stepped, you were crunching history, and we quickly realized that the power of history and that it can, in fact, imprison you. And we realized that it takes a great deal of strength to both respect history and not allow yourself to become a prisoner of history. And in Egypt, if you were to only build in places where history, in quotes, didn't exist, you wouldn't be able to build at all. So there's a sense of and a great need to bring history into your system, but also a need to sort of push it away at the same time. Otherwise, it will sort of overwhelm you. And that was a big sort of learning experience with this project. I won't go into detail. I'll only show a couple of pictures. We don't have a lot of time tonight. But the building is rather simple. It's a sort of disc-like form, which is really a part of the earth. It's not placed on the ground, the building. As you can see here, it descends into the ground. It rises up from the ground. It becomes a silhouette. It's more of a silhouette than it is a building. And for the most part, it's difficult to tell where the building starts and ends. And despite its enormous size, it's about 80,000 square meters or 800,000 square feet. It's still feeling somehow smaller than some of the buildings around it. Its roof is rather intriguing, and as it comes down to the ground, you're able to, your eye is drawn to the sky, and the roof almost comes right to your feet. And we also like to say that the sky is a part of the landscape. We often think of the landscape in terms of earth and soil, but the sky is just as much a part of our understanding of our place as anything else that we might stand on. And the roof not only provides that connection to the sky, but it also gives you a sort of roadmap of the interior of the building. Each of these modules are being supported by a column grid that's exposed on the interior. And these interesting little caps that you see here, those little shapes there, those are designed purely to keep the direct sunlight out for a few weeks during the year. They're almost like baseball caps so that there's no direct ultraviolet light entering the building. The diagonal shape of this roof form sort of slices through the perpendicular forms of the traditional buildings that were built in the 30s and 40s by the Italian and French colonists in Alexandria. And it provides a kind of gauge for the historical presence that surrounds it. It's almost a backdrop or a canvas for the culture that surrounds the harbor. And this is a wonderful picture of, still to this day, fishermen go without motorboats. They row out into the harbor and catch fish to bring home to sell or to eat with their families. And that, as I mentioned earlier, is much the same tradition that's been occurring here for thousands of years. And again, you can see the sort of low profile of the building in the context of the surrounding apartments, and there's a hospital next door and so forth. The building is very humble, I believe, in some ways, in that it really attempts to draw itself down and allow the seafront to be continuous. And for such a large building, that was quite challenging. We also often say that it's a real treat if you can make something big feel small. And that's, I think, something that architects often don't fully understand, especially with large cultural buildings. This is the primary facade that faces the university across the street. It's 63,000 square feet of hand-carved granite. To give you an idea of the scale of this, these are blocks are about 7 to 8 feet high. So this is about 65 feet high on the facade you're looking at. Each of the stones is unique, and they were carved by both Egyptian and Norwegian craftsmen. And it was a very difficult process to make this wall. The carvings themselves are alphabetic inscriptions throughout history. It took us 6 years just to research the carvings on the wall. In the end, there was a lot of discussion, well, what do you put on the wall? And first we thought, well, we'll make it say something, but we realized quickly that you can't say anything. So in a sense, each of the alphabetic inscriptions are there for their aesthetic content. They're meant not to signify any message. Although somebody may find a message, I'm sure they'll work on it hard enough. The process of finding the stone was very challenging. We wanted it to be in or nearby Alexandria, or certainly in Egypt, so it would be easy to transport and friendly to the region. The only place we could find was on the border of the Sudan and Egypt. And perhaps you know this, but actually the Sudan and Egypt have been at war for a number of decades, but they have called a ceasefire, so it's a bit like North Korea and South Korea in the sense that nothing happens on the line, but they disagree where the line is. So they've been sort of occupying military occupation of the border zone, and that's right where this quarry was. So we had to negotiate a peace treaty between the two countries in order to get the stone out. Once we got there, we found out that this was the same quarry that was used for a large percentage of the stones that were taken to Karnak and the temples at Karnak. And we actually discovered several artifacts that were almost fully carved, fully formed, ready to be transported, but never left. So for us, it was rather fascinating. This is a picture of one of the columns at Karnak on the left. Several thousand years between these two edifices, but the stones came probably within 500 or 600 meters of each other. The room, reading room, is rather beautiful. It can seat up to 3,200 people, and despite its large size, again, it feels rather intimate inside, and the acoustics are rather beautiful. That green light that you see there, there's also blue light. That light is actually not artificial. It's about an 8-inch solid glass block, which is impregnated into the roof system. And as the sun moves throughout the day, it passes through this glass and passes the light onto the floor and onto the tables of the spaces. And so you're always aware of the passage of time. It's very funny, if you're sitting there reading, if you sit in one place too long, eventually one of these green sort of swashes of color will wipe across your desk and you're forced to take a break for 10 minutes so that it goes away. So it's kind of giving you a sense of encouragement to move while you're in the space. It's a rather large volume, about 2.3 million cubic feet of space. That doesn't mean anything really to me, but I've been told that it's about 3 times the volume of the main space in Grand Central Station, which many of you may have seen. So rather serene and sober, but also rather lively space at the same time. It was designed to the highest caliber of guidelines. When we went to Egypt, there were no real building regulations, so we more or less wrote the building code for Egypt with this project. There were no ADA regulations. We built the building entirely for wheelchair access. It's open to men and women, and it has a very large social agenda within the country, so it's been seen as an enormous, sort of enormously pivotal point in the politics of Egypt because of its sort of very liberal identity. I was, of course, when we read about the uprisings in Egypt, our thoughts first went to the library, and we were trying to find out what was happening, and we sent around some messages, and we also got some messages back. And we have these rather beautiful pictures that are taken from the area around the library. As you can see, we designed a plaza out in front of the library here, as well as a number of spaces for collecting both inside and outside the building. When we designed this plaza, the police in Egypt wanted us to put a wall around it. It's traditional in Egypt when you have any large public space that you build a wall around it so you can basically control crowds if there is any kind of an uprising. But it took us several years, but eventually we negotiated the police down to not having a wall. So the wall was taken away from the design, and it meant that this space was open to the public. Well, the result of this was that during the uprisings, the people of Alexandria really attempted to protect the library, and we were really very excited to receive these images because there was no telling as to what was happening to the library during the most intense portion of the uprising. And in this particular case, the people, young and old, and people from both sides of the political divide had created a sort of a human circle around the building, which allowed it to function throughout this period of change in government. And these are some of the pictures that were sent through the email. The plaza itself was used for protests, all peaceful protests, and they were also using the space in front of the building for prayer. So while all that was going on, we were trying to manage a business, which was very difficult. When you're that, we were a fairly small company trying to build $350 million building, and we had no financial backing. So we had to get some other work, and we won some few other competitions. One of them was this Norwegian embassy in Berlin that was mentioned earlier. It's part of a larger complex that houses all the Nordic countries' embassies. The Norwegian embassy is here, and I won't, again, spend too much time with this project, but the key feature of it is this primary facade that faces into a public space, and that facade is made out of a solid piece of stone that we decided to bring from Norway to Germany, directly to Berlin. The piece of stone itself required was something like 15 meters high, 5 meters wide, and about a meter deep, so it would weigh up to 130 tons. When we proposed this to the client, of course, they were a little nervous. You can't do that. Sounds, why can't we just cut the stone up into small pieces and send it in little boxes like everyone else? And we thought, well, you could do that, but actually it may be cheaper. We had talked to some people in the quarry, and it turns out that by cutting stone in this way, there's less waste, around 30% less waste, and it was 25% cheaper because there was less labor involved in setting the stone up. So they finally agreed to do that because it was cheaper, and if it's cheaper, you can't say no, apparently. So everyone said, yes, we'll do this. It's less expensive. So we went to a quarry, and we peeled back the topsoil, and this is a granite ridge which ran under the topsoil, which was carved by glacial ice about 30,000 years ago. And this one particular stone was found to be free of cracks and easily removable. And so it was taken out in one piece. It actually only took 4 days with about 5 people to remove the stone. And as you can see, it was left in, the surface was left intact. And then it was time to hoist the stone out of the ground, and that was a very exciting day. And these, as you see here, are the ridges that were carved by the glacial ice, still as part of the surface of the stone, and that was meant to be the actual facade of the building. So it was placed on a boat near the quarry, and then the boat sailed to Berlin, and it was lifted, hoisted out, and put onto another smaller boat and on a canal, and then lifted by a crane and dropped into place. Because the stone is so large and so heavy, it holds itself up by its own inertia, so there are no bolts and no fixed foundation system. These are the only two things, these little sort of nipples that fit into those holes there. That's all that holds it up. So it's sort of holding itself up. Amazingly, the the German safety authorities would not allow the stone to actually hold the roof up, which it was designed to do, because they said natural materials cannot be trusted because we can't test them. And they wanted us to test the stone, and their test was to take the piece of stone somewhere, load it until it broke, and then you'd know how much load it could take. But then, of course, you'd have to get another stone and do the same thing over again, so this would happen in perpetuity. They forced us to place these columns on either side. They weren't part of the original design. So the stone is actually holding up the roof, but these columns are there because we had to put them in. We made them removable so that one day they could just be taken out when everyone in the building department dies off. So there is the facade, which is this rather beautiful idea of taking the earth and literally rotating it 100 well, let's say 90 degrees. Its surface is purely the natural form of the earth lifted upright. We did a few other small projects. We made this very small museum on the west coast of Norway that was published a lot actually in America, and in fact we lectured many years ago, I want to say 92, for the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art at Yerba Buena, and they used it on their poster, this little museum, which was for a very, very small group of pensionists, all of them over the age of 70. They had no money, and they called us up while we were doing the Alexandria Library and said, could you make this museum for us, but we don't have any money. Can you do it for free? And we said, well, you know, we can't really work for free. But in the end, they sort of, it's from the, this is the island where my partner, Chittle Thorsen, is from. So there was sort of long history there with his family. And we agreed to do it. And we said, well, we can do it, but, you know, we're not going to be able to make any drawings, and there's no contract. And so they finally agreed, and we got together, and we spent one day, it was spent in the cafe. That's the room program for the the building. And then later there was a series of sketches that were made. And because they couldn't afford to make anything of any substance, they really almost had no money to build it. We created what we often call a sausage building, so that in the local town hall they had this rectangular tube and a small piggy bank that you could drop money into, and every time you dropped money into it, the tube would get a little bit longer, because the more money they would make, the longer the building would be. And so they saved up enough money to get this length of a building, and they put their fishing is dedicated to fishing culture. Most of these men were fishermen and live in the community nearby. And so there's the building in the landscape. It was treated with sour milk, kind of yogurt, on the concrete to get this sort of, I've forgotten the word now, the patch of lichen, thank you. It's something you would know here in San Francisco, I think, that word. It grows on the edge of the building now. It's sort of rather inartfully placed in the landscape, and that was part of the point. Fishermen are kind of rugged people, so it's like as if you had just put down your fishing tackle box on the rocks. This is a project which many people are aware of, and after the Alexandria Library was finished, we thought, well, we didn't know exactly where we would go. We enjoy working with cultural buildings and working with buildings that a lot of people use. So we entered at the last second, really, literally 5 weeks before it was due, the National Opera Competition in our backyard in Oslo. This was one of the drawings made just shortly after the competition. To give you an idea of the site in relation to our office, that's the office that I showed you earlier there, and that's the site. So we could literally look out the back window. And so it was nice not to have to fly 5 or 6 hours to see the site. And we were able to go there regularly. But it was a very difficult site in the fact that it was partially on land and partially in the water, and it was adjacent to the historical center of the city founded by the Danes 400 years ago. The city of Oslo is about 1,000 years old, so there's a lot of things, archaeological remains again under the ground in many places. They found a couple of old ships, one Viking ship near to this site. Our building is actually partially on land as an idea, and we wanted to expose the portion in the water as being a part of the water rather than filling out the land and creating a sort of artificial key for the building. You cross a small bridge. This is a competition drawing, but at that time we had 2 bridges, but it eventually became one very narrow bridge onto a plaza, and then you enter into the opera itself. The building in plan, although it feels quite complicated geometrically, the plan is extremely simple. And this is something else I also like to tell students of architecture. When you're given a very complex program, it's important that you understand how to edit things down and not be afraid of simplicity. When you, in this particular building, 650 people work, some of them 24 hours a day, so they need to be able to have a mental map of the place that they inhabit while they work. And a simple plan that has clear orientation and guidance for those people is very, very important. So you can see that it's kind of very simple lamination of different functions. The plazas on the left, the lobbies, the theaters, and then the back of house workshops and the administration and so forth. And those 2 blue arrows show the primary circulation routes between the front and the back of house. And that's really all there is to it. And in a sense, you wouldn't necessarily understand that when you see the exterior of the building, but it's these 2 worlds coming together that create the richness of the design. Another thing that's important is that the profile of the building, like the Alexandria Library, is rather low. So we brought the profile of the building down as far as we possibly could, because the city is divided into 2 parts, the center and the growing domestic areas towards the east and the northeast. Most architects entering this competition created a large edifice that blocked off views to and from the city. Our building is, in fact, a kind of link between the 2 portions of the city. You don't look at the opera, you look past it, or you look through it. So I often say that our buildings, and this building in particular, it's a verb, it's not a noun. It's not an object in and of itself. It's connecting a larger number of objects together. And one of the key features to make that happen is the roofscape, which literally ascends from the saltwater of the Oslo fjord up to the roof of the opera. And that was a quite difficult piece to create. It's, I believe, 23,000 square meters, 240,000 square feet of hand-carved marble. Each piece was hand placed and is unique. We actually tried to create a scripting program to lay out these drawings, and the computer could only finish about 90% of the actual design, and then it blew like 3 computers, so we had to finish it off by hand. I love that idea that we had to finish the computer drawings by hand to get it to work. Here is the primary view of the opera from the fjord as you approach it. This was the day after the opening, but the building actually was opened before construction was complete, and they had put an ad in the paper saying, you can come see the opera before it's finished, and something like 15,000 or 13,000 people showed up. And they only had 4 security guards, so it was a kind of a mob. And the same was true the day after the opening. Thousands, I think 33,000 people came just to traverse the roof and to enter into the opera itself and to go down and touch the water, which is actually a unique experience now. As you know, even in San Francisco, engineers and traffic planners have distanced us from the water, and you can see the water, but you can't always touch it. It's usually a 3 to 8 foot drop between where you stand and where the water is, and this sort of brings back a natural condition into the heart of a city. To get to the main plaza, this very narrow bridge funnels everyone into a very tight space, and when the building is fully occupied and when you're entering for the night of a show, you literally have to rub shoulders with strangers to get across this bridge, and that sort of resets your psyche as you move into a fairly complex and rich cultural facility. As you enter onto the plaza itself, you're able to see up to these new platforms, and there's something very unusual about seeing people at these kind of odd angles. There's a direct response that the human body has, and as a human being, to have to navigate over somewhat unusual shapes changes your connection to the place that you are. So rather than just putting one foot in front of the other, your body is slightly shifting on its axis, and this creates a very intrinsic link to the space that you're in. And as you move up that first ramp next to the door and you ascend to the roof, because of the scale of the ramp, you're actually looking sort of up at people, which is another unusual quality that the building engenders. And seeing people at different angles is an important feature of how the roof works. And once you get to the top, it's interesting because as you're going up the ramp, you can only see the sky again. But as you turn around right at the top of the ramp, it's really very quick, only very quick turn. You suddenly are aware of the city again, the city of Oslo. And then you take a couple of steps to the left to get on the final ramp, literally only about 3 steps. And suddenly the city disappears again because this space over here, if you can tell, if very carefully you look, there's a kind of bow shape on the roof. And that bow shape cuts off your view of the city, and all you're aware of, again, is the sky. So it's a constant manipulation of your contact with other human beings and then your contact as a group towards the natural condition around you. And people love to go to the top of things, and they also like to go to the edge of things. So you have a lot of people sort of, once they get to the top, then they rush to the edge, and they want to see what's out there. And it's just sort of a natural thing. I do it too. I'm sure many of you are similar. But this is, again, a similar, or let's say an idea that I mentioned earlier in the talk, that we are fleshy creatures, and there are certain things that connect most of us together in how we act. The building is also accessible by the handicapped, and in fact wheelchair users really enjoy going with these ramps up and down the opera roof. There are a number of different ways to sit or to lounge on the roof depending on your interest in getting sun or just finding a place to kind of hang out. And then again you move down the side of the opera back towards the door and towards the entrance, towards the water. There's this wonderful feeling of the fjord almost penetrating under this what appears to be a cantilever, but is not a cantilever, of the lobby space. All kinds of odd people. This guy is obviously from CCA. Just went there. This is a view of the stairs, and actually there is a staircase. Most people think it's only ramps, but we have actually integrated a normal stair that you can use on the sides. So you don't have to take the ramps if you don't want to. I'd say, interestingly, 90% of the people don't want to take the stair, even though it's there and it has to be there by code. It also is a capacity to come back to the water. And there's one very beautiful quality that this ramp creates as it dives into the fjord. Because the water cannot be made precise, and the algae and everything that grows on this little granite toe is imprecise, the line that runs along that portion of the ramp is very impure. It's hard to discern where it is, where it stops. It's moving all the time. In contrast to that, where it lifts up off the water, it's very clean and very pure. So there's this distinction between the softness and the hardness all occurring in one location. These are some pictures I wanted to show you. They're very funny. One day I was going to the opera to meet someone, and they had a fire alarm. So everyone in the opera had to be dumped out into the plaza while they checked the fire alarm, and that included the little ballet school. There's a ballet school there for young people. So I was just crossing the bridge, and I turned and suddenly saw this amazing array of ballet dancers waiting for the fire drill thing to be over, and I took these pictures. They're really amazing. These were just sort of out on the terrace in front of the opera, waiting for the fire department to finish. I didn't have a camera. I only had my telephone, and it wasn't a very good phone, so you can see they're a little grainy. Yeah, well, it's pretty romantic. Oh, by the way, this is the entrance area, which comes to a very, very narrow point, and all the little ballet dancers were standing in that space. It was really fun. Well, yeah, it was pretty romantic, and I couldn't help but take these pictures. And then as I was leaving, I noticed this, which I really liked, a couple kissing in the foreground there, and they were really going at it with this sort of romantic scene in the background. This is a theme that will come up later. The other kind of quality of the building is that it works with just one or two people there. And in fact, there's wonderful times of the day early in the morning when they do Tai Chi on the roof of the opera, and there's a sense of solitude when it's very quiet. But likewise, it works with huge crowds. And this is a group of 4,000 people. They had created the opera Carmen to be shown inside the opera, and they sold the tickets so quickly that they had to create a digital screen outside to project the opera Carmen for those that couldn't get in, and they bought tickets for this outdoor event. So there were actually 4,000 people outside and 1,300 inside, and it was so popular that this year, I believe, this season, they're going to reverse it and play opera Carmen outside and put a digital projection of it inside. At the top of the building is the stage tower, which is clad in aluminum. You might be surprised. It may seem like a very expensive building, and of course it is expensive, but actually for its building type, it was very cheap, and we had a very strict budget, which was set by the Norwegian government. In order to get one penny more increase in budget, we'd actually have to ask the entire parliament to vote on it. So it was very hard to get any extra money, and it was very, very strictly controlled. So we did a lot of things to control the cost, and one of them is that we wanted aluminum finish on this stage tower, and we wanted very thick aluminum sheets, but that was too expensive. So we realized that in order to get thin aluminum sheets, which would normally kind of be wiggly like this and be not so very pretty to look at, if we incorporated a kind of system of corrugation into the thin aluminum panels, it would make them stiffer. So these little holes, they're not holes, but indentations, are allowing this thin aluminum sheet to be thicker and stronger. And they're also very beautiful to look at. Some are out and some are in concave and convex. The natural aluminum is also a wonderful material for sort of absorbing the atmosphere. So here's some pictures of that piece just throughout different times of the day. the quality of sky and the color of sky is quite beautiful in these northern regions. And at night, obviously, the building takes on a new sort of identity. And you can see the entry a little bit more clearly there. And as you cross the plaza into the entry, this, by the way, is where those ballet dancers were, the little girls, and they were standing in that space there in that one picture. This is the way into the opera hall and lobby itself. And so once you're sort of greeted by this large opera plaza, then you're compressed down into this very, very low opening. And from that, you move into a space which is difficult to define, certainly not a domestic type of space that's very organic. And the idea here was that not all shows sell out, so it's not always a full audience. And so you want the lobby to feel comfortable when a show is only half full. So this shape, this organic shape, allows different groups of people of different sizes to interact without feeling uncomfortable if it's too full or not full enough. One of the unusual challenges that we had was that, again, going back to the idea of cost, in order to save money, it was made as a sort of design-build project, so we actually had to design and construct the foundations before the plan was finished for the actual building above. So we created all these foundations. My light's not very good. Here, before we finished the design of this portion of the building. Well, what happened was as we moved forward with the project, we realized that the pile foundations that went deep down into the clay did not line up with the structural beams that we had planned and needed to have in the certain locations above. So after a month of trying to get everything to line up, which was really difficult, we realized, why do we have to get everything to line up? It doesn't have to line up. All we have to do is just connect the dots from this point here to the pile cap, and that created these very unusual column shapes, which appear to be just the architect maybe not being silly, but in fact, it's a very efficient way to do this. There's one pile cap there, there's another pile cap there, and those are the lines of the roof beams, and they're connecting down. You see they're thicker in the middle, because that's where the greatest buckling moment is. And they also are sort of almost wild in their appearance. And this picture, which many of you may think is just, again, sort of humorous, it's not meant to be funny in a way. It's serious. So you'll see here that we didn't draw anything up in the ceiling. That's not because we didn't design the ceiling. This is what we wanted. And we wanted this to be a sort of definable space. So ultimately, in the end, you can see we've removed all the light fixtures, all the lighting is indirect, there's no air registers. If you look in the ceiling in here, there's a million things. And so we sort of cleaned it all up and made it very pure. And the white that you see here of the columns is not paint. It's actually marble dust from the marble stones of the outside when they were cutting the stones up. In the factory, we saved all the excess dust and mixed it into the concrete to give it that color. Those circles that you see are the pieces, the places where the cranes had to lift these precast columns into place. There's two of the penguins right there. One other unusual feature is that as you're moving outside the building, people are naturally drawn to the glass to want to see what's inside. So everybody sort of comes up and sticks their nose up to the glass. And the funny thing is that once they get close enough to the glass and can actually see through it, they often sort of jump back because what's on the other side is 200 people looking back at them. So there's this amazing sense of voyeurism in the piece, and in many ways that's an important part of a public building. People enjoy seeing other people, they enjoy being seen, and that just makes people comfortable in a way that they're not able to find in other kinds of buildings. This is a view up on the other direction. I enjoy this because, again, it sort of redefines the ground plane, and you have a difficult time telling if they're standing on something or over something. The lobby itself was housing many features, notably the bathrooms, the toilets. And we worked together with Olafur Eliasson, who many of you will know, who won a competition that we created to clad, actually, the toilets in the lobby space and to create the wing wall that would define the edge of the lobby. And he made these beautiful sculpture, which is actually also very inexpensive. It's CNC'd, routed MDF, and then painted. And behind it are these very soft colored lights that shift very, very slowly throughout the day, again, to introduce a sense of time into the space. Children enjoy that wall in particular, too, I found. I think the colors attract them. In contrast to all the sort of brightness, you enter into the toilets, and the toilets are dark and cave-like. So you're sort of entering into this fantastic dark space. This is the men's on the left and the women's on the right. They're both made the same sort of powerful, dark way. There wasn't a sort of pink and blue toilet. One of the unusual qualities of the lobby that we had to work with was that the slope of the roof came down and it was meeting the floor of the lobby, and eventually you would hit your head. So we had several designs like a handrail and other things, and it just all seemed clunky. So what we did was we wrapped the floor up to meet the roof, and that's a polished marble floor. And after we did that, when the building opened, it was discovered by little kids that you could climb up there and slide down. So now families bring their children just to slide down the back of the lobby of the opera. This is the furniture that we designed to hold the champagne and coffee glasses in the main space. We were designing all of the features of the interior room. This one particular wall, this wooden wall, is an important acoustic feature to help control the level of sound in the space, and very organic. And as you move through that threshold, you enter into a staircase, which again is very monolithic, very pure. No steel is visible, and the only thing that's really changing is just the few fire sprinklers that have to come down through the roof in a particular area. As you move up into the gallery, you move back towards the hall, and you're given another view back into the lobby, and then you enter into the main hall itself, which is a horseshoe-shaped room, a rather traditional-shaped room, but created in a very contemporary way. We're using purely oak in all the surfaces, and we have no sort of house lighting, so there aren't the pretty sort of little things that you ordinarily see along the edges of the balcony. All the lighting comes from the chandelier, which is a 6.5-ton hand-blown glass chandelier that sort of filters light down. You'll see that its spacing of these glass pieces are changing, and that's because the chandelier is also an acoustic baffle for the room. And here are the shapes of the balcony fronts. Each one is shaped specifically to control sound in the room during performances. There is a funny story about this. I like to tell funny stories. I was flying U.S. Airways flight about a year ago, and I picked up the in-house flight magazine, and there was a picture of the opera. It was, wow. And I read the article, and it said that we had used cognac to stain the oak. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. I don't remember using that much cognac. And so I did some research, and then I figured it out. And what had happened is this oak was actually stained by ammonia gas. We didn't use a liquid. We put each panel in a room, filled it with ammonia gas, and it burned the oak all the way through to give it this dark color. Well, the Norwegian word for ammonia is ammoniac. And the French picked that up and thought it was Armagnac. And then the Americans picked it up and thought it was cognac. So that's how things work. We have integrated all of the features of the lighting into each of the elements, again, so that there's not a lot of distraction by infrastructure. This is a detail of the chandelier, and here's a kind of close-up of each of the little pieces that run on those strips. They were made by a glass blower in Norway. Another feature of the room that's very spectacular is the stage curtain, which was designed by an artist here in California by the name of Pei White, who's also worked, I believe, with the SF MoMA. So there was a rich group of artists that worked together with us on this project. This piece, the stage curtain, is kind of deceptive. It was actually created by scanning bits of aluminum foil and then working that scan into a digital weaver, and then it's woven into what you see. So what looks highly three-dimensional is in fact no thicker than, say, the screen that this is being projected onto. It's only about 2 or 3 millimeters thick. And also what's astonishing about it is that despite the fact that it looks silver, is not a single silver thread in the entire tapestry. The silver that's being perceived is the mixing of various color threads together to give the impression of silver. This is probably close to life-size detail of a part of it. And if you were to go up to that and touch it in real life, it would be almost smooth. You would just feel the threads. It's an astonishing piece. when they don't use it, people boo. So now they have to use the stage curtain for every show. The remainder of the project is actually very utilitarian, and again, in order to save money, we created a very simple, direct form of construction for the back of house areas. And there's a long hallway that leads you to all the stages, and all the people that work there know that if they ever get lost, they can just come to this hallway, and it's got natural light. It's easy to get to, and that'll take you anywhere you need to go. And there are very, very large workshops, all designed to have natural light. We added glass into the sidewalk level so that people walking by could see into the opera and see what's happening, also into the workshops where they make wigs and costumes. And the rehearsal rooms are lifted high up with a view of the city and the surroundings, and also very effectively and efficiently designed. I'm going to finish this project with a little picture of how the site looked 200, 150 years ago. Well, probably this one is probably 100 years ago, but the area was heavily industrialized, and there were a lot of logging factories there, and as a result, there were 60,000 tons of pollutants that were embedded in the soil and in the water, making it impossible to swim there today. It was a heavily polluted part of the city. So our project was intended to contain the pollutants, which we did throughout the process, and now it's actually possible to swim in the water again, and it's introduced a whole new layer of fauna and fish life and bird life there. And so you'll see these amazing two swans, which often show up. They began to appear shortly after construction was completed. And they're pretty much there all the time. So if you go to the opera, I'm sure you'll see them. And there's a kind of an attraction to this interaction. And there's that soft line I was talking about. And there's another sort of odd character back there, another piece of wildlife. We call that wildlife. One of the things that was amazing was that after the opening night, we were, of course, very nervous. And we thought, well, you know, will the acoustics work? Will everything work? And, you know, you work very hard to make sure it will all work. But ultimately, as an architect at such large scale, you really need the presence of live audiences to fulfill the mission of the building. So we were very excited to read the next morning the critics, because the critics often have a clear idea of how a building operates. And so I ran out immediately, 7:30 in the morning, with a hangover to find all the newspapers and see what the critics had to say. I was hoping to read something like, you know, great acoustics, wonderful building. And instead, the first headline that we picked up was, and this is an internet site about the same headline, "Couple Caught Having Sex on Roof of Opera." So apparently, while we were in there watching the show, there was a couple on top of us, directly over us, trying to consummate the building. And they were politely escorted off of the roof, this article says, and asked to go elsewhere. There's a really funny piece down on the bottom. I don't know if you can read it. It says, "And everyone at the event thought that the climax was the fireworks." Very interesting. The other thing that I found intriguing about the building is that there are so many images on the internet that you can practically create an entire lecture based purely on images that other people have taken. So in this case, I've just kind of grabbed a bunch of things and threw them together some time ago. It's been about a year now. I need to do this again because I've got to catch up. But these are some of the images that people have taken, just at random, sort of thrown together, of the building. It tells you a bit about how people perceive the building. So after all of this, then we started have people sending us YouTube links and video links, which was a new thing for me. I would never had people send you a message saying, "Here, I made this film, just click on this." And so we got a lot of those. One of them, the next one, this will wake you up, was sent to us randomly. Totally illegal, of course. Yeah. Do not try this at home. It's a janitor. Yeah, so apparently he's French. This film goes on for a little while, but I stopped it here for a particular reason. It's because of this very bizarre car in the background here. That car, which looks very strange, is actually a very interesting car. In Norway, there are several companies that are creating zero emissions vehicles. In other words, they're only creating fresh air as they move about, and they're trying to market them around the world. And this is one of the earlier prototypes of that zero emissions vehicle. One of the companies approached us in the development of their zero emissions vehicle, and they wanted us to help brand the car, not design it, because that was already done. And the team that was working on it realized that if it only produces fresh air, then you could put it inside of a kind of big bubble, as they've done here, and there'll always be fresh air inside of it. And they liked that idea, so they created a film, which I'll show you, based on that concept. Yes, that was our foray into the branding world. It was very, very fun to work with different groups of people as we're working with that project. While all of that was going on, we're nearly to the end. One day in 2001, it was, of course, a beautiful day in New York City, and this happened. Everybody, probably everyone, has a story about what they were doing that day. It was a very traumatic day for many, many people, and remains traumatic for many people even to this day. They cleaned up the site of the tragedies at the World Trade Center towers very quickly. In fact, really within a year, they had already removed most of the debris and made it possible to return people to their work and to their homes. So often when people complain about the speed of the project, I like to think about this period where everyone reacted so quickly and so efficiently. There was a great deal of trauma related to people involved with that event, and all of us who are working with the project still to this day encounter people who lost loved ones or brothers or sisters or husbands and wives, and these are sort of images of some of the artifacts that were taken from the site and rescued. Bicycles that were never collected. Either the people that owned them are dead, or they just sort of gave up. But in many ways, it's a project fraught with psychological challenges, and we are still dealing with the geopolitical consequences of that event. So there's in no way has it gone away, and it will certainly not go away as an idea for quite some time. There was a number of competitions for various buildings after the Libeskind master plan. We said no several times, actually. We didn't feel it was appropriate. We thought New Yorkers should solve this challenge themselves. A lot of competitions were fulfilled, and there was one project left. It was a cultural building on the memorial itself. It was a very small building compared to the others. We eventually were talked into entering. We entered and somehow won. And the project became a kind of very central focal point for political activity, because it literally is the only building on the memorial. All the other things by Norman Foster and Richard Rogers and Maki, they all ring the memorial or on a separate site. But this particular building sat literally between the two footprints of the original towers. So a great deal of our time was spent walking the design through large and complex groups of people who all had a vested interest as stakeholders in the project. This is a final rendering made by one of the developers, Silverstein Properties, who's building all the skyscrapers. This is the memorial itself with the fountains where the towers once stood, in our pavilion, which is a museum now dedicated to the events of September 11th, both before, during, and after, that will allow people to understand the consequences of that event in different ways, and also allow people to understand the stories of those people that perished there at the site. So it's a quite large building, which is about 200,000 square feet, but over two-thirds of that is underground, and that's actually being designed by another architect, Davis Brody Bond, and we're designing the above-grade part, so it's one museum designed by two architects. Sound familiar? And there's a great potential to really work together with the design of these two structures to make them work in a sort of seamless way. Within the main atrium space, which is allowing light into the darker portions of the museum below ground, are placed two columns, which are rescued from the original towers themselves. The site is extremely complex. Most of us, when we think of property, we think of it in plan, like someone owns this land and someone else owns that land. But in New York City, not only is their property segregated in plan, it's also segregated in section. So if you cut a section through this site, there are 5 different owners sitting on top of each other. So you have to navigate gravity through 5 different owners. And, well, let's say there's actually only 3 owners, but 5 different subsets combined that create the different qualities of ownership on the site. So these are some of the overlapping sort of primary components where our site is. And we, of course, did this kind of fancy dance of getting the columns to line up, and we had the same problem that we had with the opera. So in the end, we decided not to have anything line up, and we just allowed the columns to be what they were. So you'll see that in just a moment. This is literally only 2 days old, this photograph, so I was there on the site 2 days ago. This gives you an idea of the enormous complexity at the site. It's moving very, very quickly. And actually, I was trying to find a way to show scale, because it's impossible really for you to understand the scale, but I did my best I could with a couple of images. This next image I'll show you is just a detail of this very same image. So it's not a separate picture. So as you get closer, you begin to see all the layers of different projects, one on top of the other. And the size of these things is also very hard to tell, but there is one picture I have. This is about 16 feet deep. So there's a kind of picture of it. So all of these beams are cantilevered and sort of tension and post-tensioned and all kinds of things going on all at once, all weaving together. And that's our building back there, sitting on the top, over the top of all of these other structures. This is a rendering of the building, and it sort of rises up from the ground again and allows the monumental quality of the memorial itself to be clear and distinct, and it opens up towards the place where the columns and the artifacts are on display. This is a stainless steel facade that we've been working with for a couple of years to get the right texture on. And it's partly matte and partly mirrored, but it's not directly mirrored. It has small angel hair scratches in it. This is a picture of the mock-up that we have in Pennsylvania. And you can see that as different qualities of light are passed on to this facade, it changes the image itself. So as it comes down to the ground here in this one location, you'll be able to see yourself reflected in the building, but not clearly, almost a ghost image of yourself. So there'll be, I believe, a constant interaction of the facade with the people that are visiting it. And this is a rendering of the atrium space. And here's where I was telling you we couldn't get any of the columns to line up below ground, so we just made this kind of chaotic structure and said, well, that's it. And it sort of served its purpose. It allowed us to continue with the design and not have to worry about what's underneath us. These are about 2 days old, these images. And that was when we basically brought the 2 columns back after nearly 10 years of being stored. And we put them into place. That was a big event. And these are some images of the site a couple of months ago. So you can actually go there and touch it. It's physical, and it will be open soon. So we're nearly done. I'm just going to show you a couple of quick projects that we've recently completed. This is a band shell in Kongsberg, which is west of Norway, in an area that's UNESCO heritage protected, very beautiful historical site, where you're not allowed to build anything that doesn't look like it's from 1783. So how would we contend with this, I suppose, is the question. And actually, they came to us very distinctly because this was a temporary band shell, which was only up for 2 weeks, which meant it didn't have to adhere to the rules of architectural aesthetics, and they really wanted something new and contemporary and fresh. And so they asked us to create this band shell that would be the sort of complement to the historical traditions that they're used to in the city center. So the jazz festival that is there is so popular that not everyone can actually fit in front of the stage or afford a ticket. So often people sit behind the stage, they can't get a ticket, and they just listen to the ambient sound and have, I guess, a party. So we created a band shell that not only threw the sound directly towards the paying audience, but allowed a little bit of the sound to leak out the back to the non-paying audience. And so this structure then is a kind of multi-acoustic form that treats the two different audiences on either side of the stage. It can be erected in about 3 days. It's stored in 3 crates for most of the year, and it's only up for a couple of weeks. This is right when they put it up. It's both pneumatic and tension structure. The cables that you see are actually unnecessary for the structure. It's completely self-supporting, but the fire department made us put them in case it ever caught fire. But it actually can withstand uplift and be a fully supporting structure. As it's built up, they still use the area underneath it for parking cars, and then slowly it becomes more and more used by the participants of the festival. And then, of course, at night, the acoustic oculus also becomes a visual oculus, allowing you to see the sky pass by during the events below. And it's sort of become a kind of an unusual icon for this very tiny little semi-traditional town. We've made a one-room museum in Sweden. It's got 1 picture in it. Kind of exciting. We've made a small bench in Guatemala, which we just finished recently. They're creating about 3,000 of these benches throughout Guatemala City to improve the sidewalks and streetscapes. And some friends of mine in Guatemala recently sent me a picture of some people using these benches. Each of them has within it a small piece which is designed by local Guatemalan artists. So every bench has a local artist, different local artists working with them. This is a museum on the northwest coast of Oslo alongside a very healthy ridge of rock next to a church that's about 450 years old. We sawed this ridge out and placed our building in it so that the ridge itself became one of the facades of the building. So we sort of inserted the building in the slot, and that allowed it to remove itself from the historical context of the church and become, in a sense, a link between history and its natural surroundings. So it's removed from the sides and the side walls to allow light in from the sides and lifted up in the air so you can see right through it to the fjord on the other side. It rains a lot in this area, so oftentimes the granite-like stone reflects the new building, and the new building reflects the church into it. So again, merging the visual identity of both projects. And here it is sort of peeking out over the fjord and a view from the main exhibition area out across the water. So on the boards, this is a project we're doing in Saudi Arabia, a cultural center, which is a quite large building, about 900 million, 9 million square meters. That's 90 million square feet. Yeah, it's big. But it's actually a very interesting project in that it brings together a large group of cultural identities, and it's a kind of an area in Saudi Arabia where it's the first cinema to be built in Saudi Arabia. Men and women can equally drive and handle money, so it's a way of expanding the cultural facilities of the country. It's sort of a test by the king. So it's a rather beautiful project too, set in the desert. And it was mentioned earlier, we're making a few projects here in North America. This is a collaborative art school in Ohio on the top, and the library in North Carolina. This is one of the music halls in Canada that we're doing in Kingston. We just won this. It's a museum in Guadalajara for natural and environmental sciences. It's based on the notion of bringing together a Spanish colonial identity of architecture together with the natural way in which canyons and valleys form microclimates in the region around Guadalajara. So if you put those two things together, it sort of creates a building, something like this. And these are some of the views of it. And that project is starting now this summer. It's collecting rainwater from the site, and it's using all the natural qualities of the climate to run the building. As was mentioned earlier, we're reconstructing Times Square all the way from 50th Street to 40th Street, 7th Avenue, and Broadway, and we're making it more comfortable for both New Yorkers and tourists. And I can't yet show you any designs because it hasn't been released to the public. And similarly, I can't show you any designs for our work on the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. We've been working very patiently to develop the project together with a clear understanding of the program and the budget to make sure that everything is healthy. But one of the things I would like to say is that we understood the history of the museum as being very important, as it once was within oh gosh, now suddenly I have to I've forgotten the name suddenly. The Veterans War Memorial Building, excuse me. And there was I think a tremendous need to sort of contain and occupy territory within that building as it existed there for many years. And of course, when the choice was made to be South of Market and Botha Building was created, there was very little context around the building, so it created a sort of parenthesis, a place that anchored culture in that part of the city, and it was very successful, and the city has grown up around it. And now that the city has grown around the SF MoMA and it's becoming more lively, and we see that there's more connections that this building will have to the city, we understand the future of the museum to open itself up to the community and be more connected to the people around it and that use it. So that's a big part of the future of the museum, and we're excited to be a part of that. So I'm pretty much finished. I'm going to show you a couple things with non-human clients, projects for non-human clients. We made a this is the bonus stuff. Since I couldn't show you the SF MoMA design, you're going to see the fountain for a cat that we did in Oslo, and we also we took a sewer line in Oslo on the left and brought it up to the ground and up to visible, and created biofiltration plants that allowed fish to live in this little canal. So that was a part of that project. We've made a bird's nest recently that can be inserted into a wall of a building, and it's possible to integrate architecture with places for natural habitats. And we're just completing now a visitor center for wild reindeer birthing area in north of Oslo. So this is a place where you can go and watch wild reindeer do the things that they do in the wild, and you don't disturb them. So it's mainly created because there's so much interest for people to see this that it disturbs the animals significantly. So we've created this design in such a way that it will allow the reindeer not to be frightened by people as they approach. So this is some recent construction photographs. This is the frame that was made out of metal, and then we've created this wooden form inside of it that was routed out of, a monumental piece of wood. And this is it being brought in by, that's a military truck, by the way, that brought it in. It's on a military reservation. And this is it being placed in. I don't have the final images of it yet because it's actually being put in now, actually, this week. But this is a sort of rendering of that project. And actually, that mountain in the background is Snøhetta. So this is at the base of Snøhetta. Thank you very much for your patience. Everybody's tired and wants to eat. What's the item number 3 on the menu? Yes.
In the back.
The work is an impressive connection between technical and constructional difficulty and poetic expression. I wondered if you might comment on the issues of bringing those two together and the sort of critical confluence that's necessary.
Well, I mean, construction people can be equally poetic. Sorry, it's still on here, but no, I think they turned the sound off. So I'll just talk really loud. Oh, there it goes. The story about the stone that was brought to Berlin. Actually, it wasn't our capacity to make that happen. It was the construction team. So when we met the quarry owner, who had 20 years of experience cutting stone, he said, I could do you a stone twice as big, no problem. He was just as poetic as anybody else. So I'm not sure that there's a jump there, but I think you have to approach everything with the understanding that simplicity is important, efficiency is important, cost should be a part of your thinking, and if the poetry overwhelms the process, then it's not good poetry. I would call it narrative myself rather than poetry. Yes, any others? Are we done? Yes, maybe we're done. Okay, well, thank you.